With just under 2 weeks to go until Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning releases to theaters all around the world, we thought here on Spoiler Alert it was time to revisit some past missions, give you all the spoilers, and tell you whether or not you should watch them. That's all right here, right now on Spoiler Alert. Welcome to Spoiler Alert. We are here as always ready to give you all the spoilers for all the movies that are coming out this year. But before we do that, we have a little bit of time, Evan. We've got a couple weeks before we have another big release coming up.
I think our favorite of the year.
Definitely my most anticipated, that's for sure. Because
after watching more of the trailers, it's definitely up there. I still have a few others that I've been more excited for, but I'm still very, very
nevertheless, in just a few weeks, actually 2 weeks, we will get, after long years of waiting, I've been waiting for this for 5 years, at least 5 years.
Yep.
We will finally get Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning, originally titled Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 2, but I think in more of a marketing move to get a wider audience.
Change it to something cooler.
They changed the title, but nevertheless, we're getting the movie soon. And so to prepare for that, as we do here, we sometimes have to go back in time and revisit the movies that lead up to that, just as we did with Captain America, with Thunderbolts. This time it's with Mission Impossible. Now, I am very excited for this because Mission Impossible is one of my favorite franchises.
Would have never guessed.
And yeah, I know, right? But I love going back and rewatching them, seeing how they've evolved over the course of their history.
And how the characters have developed, especially over years.
Right.
We'll, of course, get into.
And something that's very interesting is, so before I started rewatching them this time to prepare for this episode, I actually bought the original TV show, the original Mission Impossible TV show that it's all the movies are based on.
Yeah, that's cool.
And it's been really interesting to see not only
where they kind of pulled it from.
Yeah, well, so not only to see how different it is in some parts, but to see certain episodes that they were inspired by. Like they'll just do different things. A couple things I remember in Ghost Protocol and Fallout is that they have just certain sequences that they pull directly from concepts in the TV show. And so it's really interesting to see them transition that from a 60s TV show with
that they were like, hey, we
budget.
really like this. Let's now bring it to the big screen, put a big budget on it, bring it to life.
But with that said, like as you start watching the Mission Impossible movies, if you came from the TV show, they're very different and they're not really what you expect.
Yeah.
And the funny thing too is back when May 1996, when Mission Impossible originally released, there were a lot of fans that were upset for the spoilers that we'll get into in a moment. But with that said, Evan, do you have any big news that you want to share? Anything that you think that our audience would be interested in finding out, learning about in the movie industry?
Oh, I was going to say about my personal life.
We'd be very interested in that, but on a different podcast.
Well, we did get our final trailer for Final Reckoning.
Yeah, and it's really not that much different.
It was literally, I think there was a total of 10, maybe 15 seconds in the entire trailer that was new.
A couple of extended scenes, just mainly to showcase that this movie is going to be released in IMAX, which, I mean, we've already got our IMAX tickets ready.
Yeah.
We are gearing up for this, and I think it looks incredible.
Big news.
Something
I can't think of anything.
Something that is very interesting, and we're not going to get into like the political side of this, but there are reports that Donald Trump's saying he wants to impose a 100% tariff on movies produced outside the United States.
Yeah.
Who knows what that is going to even end up being like?
Because they could do a similar thing.
Political side of that, but
my logical perspective is they would do a similar thing to like Cars, where what they did when I was working in new cars is they would just send everything or the last part of it to America, and then they would finalize it and a final assembly, and then they would just have the sticker of saying it was there. So I would assume that they do the same thing of being like final production was done in
I just don't see that being practical. I sure as hell don't support anything that would go in that direction, because I mean, you look at a movie or a series like Mission Impossible, that would have a huge impact on a series like Mission Impossible.
Almost all movies are shot all across the world.
Yeah, because that's what filmmaking is. It's gathering talent from everywhere and putting people in locations. Putting people in locations where they normally can't go to, right? And you just look at movies like James Bond, Mission Impossible, The Avengers,
Star Wars.
They do.
How else are they supposed to replicate those planets?
Right, or even Star Wars.
CGI,
but the idea is transporting you to places that you can't be in real life, or that you
and
maybe
to do
you
that,
can't
they go
afford
to the sceneries that are in the world that are the best replication of what that scene would feel
right.
like.
And so even for a series franchise like Mission Impossible, they've been to so many places throughout the world, which we'll talk about as we go through all these movies. But something like that would have such a big impact on the film industry. Hopefully, nothing actually turns
really
out of
stupid.
that, because it would be
Not,
very stupid.
I mean, I clearly believe a lot of what he does say, but I think that would be a very interesting play. It would definitely kill a lot of the film industry.
Yeah, it would.
Yeah.
It would.
Anyway,
let's talk about some Mission Impossible. You ready for this? So I'm gonna hope so, because we're gonna start anyways. So Mission Impossible, 1996, the very first one. So this movie was the first movie produced by Tom Cruise.
Classic.
So right from the start, his handprint has been all over this franchise,
which I think has been
his
something
baby.
that I've loved, and you can see that, especially with a lot of these more recent productions and a lot of the behind the scenes that we've seen, where he really is making the film without actually making the film. Like, he's not sitting there like, oh, let me direct and everything, but he's really the visionary behind all of this. He's
very actively involved in the producing,
physically, mentally,
the hiring
and
of everybody that's there,
which I love.
The directing, the writing, and then obviously he's the main star of it.
Yeah.
So it really is his baby. This is Tom Cruise's biggest thing is Mission Impossible, because
it's what he's known for more than anything else.
Right, and it's because he took a relatively small scale espionage TV show from the 60s that he's
admired and loved, and he was like, I'm gonna make this.
Right.
And he admired it and loved it so much that he was just like, you know what, I'm gonna spark this up, and we're gonna make it live for 30 years basically.
You can see the passion spill out on screen, because especially as they've gone on. But today we're only gonna review the first 3 movies, because there's too much to talk about to do all 7 of them leading up to Final Reckoning.
Yep.
And so make sure to tune in next week when we actually dive into the
4, 5, and 6.
Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, and Fallout. Those will be fun.
I know that you're excited.
I'm so excited for that. But before we get that, let's talk about Mission Impossible. So for those of you who haven't seen Mission Impossible, the story follows a spy agency called the Impossible Mission Force, IMF. And it follows
IMDb.
It follows a newer agent named Ethan Hunt, played by Tom Cruise, who is on a mission in Prague, and things go wrong. He's accused of being a mole within the organization, and the story follows him trying to clear his name. So the movie also stars John Voight as Jim Phelps,
which I loved.
He's a great actor.
I was going to say, he's there's a lot that he's been in. I just remember him a lot from like National Treasure.
Yeah.
I grew up watching that and I love that movie. But he did such a great job.
The very interesting thing, so Jim Phelps is a role in the original Mission Impossible TV show, played by Peter Graves. So they didn't bring him back. They didn't bring back Peter Graves to play in this role. And so there's within the IMF, within the Mission Impossible fandom, there's debate whether or not this is canonical to the TV show, whether they're in the same universe or not. We'll let you decide that. Let us know in the comments what you think. But
same shit, different.
Either way, because we're called spoiler alert, we're going to give you the spoilers now. So it turns out, beginning of the movie, right? So Ethan's on this mission in Prague, and all his team dies, including apparently
it's this huge sabotage.
Jim Phelps, right?
And it was, I love this, the sequence of it. I was going to add that in just a second, but the sequence of, watching his character on screen struggle, even though we don't really have a lot of the connection to his team, we're not really like fully involved, but the sequence of him just now being like, I need to step up to the plate and try and save somebody, they're dead, and he just kept losing at every single corner until finally they see Jim Phelps and his character
he's apparently shot down on the bridge, and that's it. And then Ethan goes to meet with spoiler alert. Ethan goes to meet with a head of the IMF, not the head, but an agent within the IMF, Kittredge, played by Henry Czerny. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Kittredge has always been in the IMF, which I think is kind of fun.
And so
he
goes to meet him, right? And he is accused of being the mole within the IMF. That kind of kicks off the story. But with that kind of brief plot summary, Evan, give me what you liked about the first Mission Impossible that started it all.
Well, I really love that it was kind of the first introductory of, this is where the series goes. And at first, we were just kind of like, oh, this is a really fun movie. Like, who knew that it was going to be going on for basically 30 years. But now looking back at it and seeing the sequence of Ethan Hunt and Tom Cruise's character through all of the films, seeing kind of where things originally started, especially it was 90s cinema. It was kind of a little bit cheesy at its times and everything. Different grayscales and coloring, but it was still really fun because I mean, it was more of that original film in my book, right?
Compared to what Mission Impossible has evolved into, especially to the oddball that Mission Impossible
this still
2 was,
holds up very well to a very current.
It not only holds up very well, but it's very grounded compared to the rest of them. I mean, yeah, the thing that I think this movie did really well was take the spy genre. And it didn't try to be James Bond.
Yeah.
Right?
There's a lot more in like some of the newer ones that they do a lot more cool extreme stunts and scenarios.
But that's the thing is like even
this one was very simple.
It was a lot more grounded, but it still had some cool stunts. So, I mean, it had the CIA Black Vault break-in where he's hanging, he's rappelling to get the knock list. But it also even the train scene at the end, a lot of that was visual effects, but they did build out a big old wind rig where they blew wind at 100 miles an hour while they filmed that. I think it was 100 miles an hour. It was
crazy.
Something insane. Yeah. Maybe not that extreme, but you start to see that even though this movie is a lot more espionage, more spy, more thriller, it still takes, there are pieces in there that tell you what Mission Impossible will become in later movies with all the big
and I think at first, even then, if it was just a standalone film, not saying that I don't love the other ones, clearly I do, but like even just that movie by itself was really well done, that they didn't need to keep setting it up. And that's one thing that I did like all of these films kind of on their own can just kind of stand where they are, where you don't really need to know too much about who the characters are other than Ethan Hunt, which we just kind of follow his story. But I really enjoyed that, especially back then when who knew if Mission Impossible 2 or 3 was going to come out. The film itself was just almost so perfect with kind of where it stood. And that was one thing that I did appreciate, because too many movies nowadays, they leave you on such a weird cliffhanger and you're like, oh, I got to go see a second one. Yes, for advertising and marketing, that's great. But then you go see the second or the third one and it's not really as good. The only movie that had a sequel to it that was amazing was Shrek 2. Shrek 2 was so much better than Shrek 1, and I will die on that fucking hill. I will die on it. The point is,
yeah, I did get lost in your point a little bit.
is they did a great job with just making the film almost be as if it was a standalone, and then they kept growing.
And then from there, and that's really how all the Mission Impossibles have done, is they've all they haven't really, even
they've all been
their
similar story. Well, I was going to say some of the newer ones, they're a little different, where they kind of
build off of what previous movies came from, but they
still have their own.
They have a
story,
a definite conclusion that if they couldn't make any more, they wouldn't.
Except for our most recent one, clearly.
Except for Dead Reckoning. But even to an extent, Dead Reckoning didn't have a huge cliffhanger. It was still
we just knew that they needed to go and basically find the entity.
Right.
That was kind of all. But anyway.
I do like that this was a lot more standalone.
I like the word grounded. I think that that's a great representation of how this film was.
Yeah. And
especially for 96. Is that what you said?
Yeah, 1996. Yeah. What a summer for movies, man. 96 also had Independence Day come out. What a time to be alive. But this movie is very different from the other ones in that it is definitely the slowest paced of.
Well, but that's also because there was a little bit more of the character development.
Yeah, which I think that character-driven story.
Well, yeah, and it's also the first of any series. That's most of any movies, unless if it's like we've already seen some type of the development. Like, I can't really say Batman because Batman's been established, but then they created the new one with Robert Pattinson, right? They didn't need to go back through and do the whole like this is how Batman, became Batman from Bruce Wayne. Like,
right?
With this, they just they had to set him.
The
up
crazy
a little
thing
bit more.
though is, this movie it's only the beginning of what Mission Impossible becomes, but it's crazy that for as good as this movie is, it actually is one of my least favorite Mission Impossible movies because the other ones are so good.
Okay, well, yeah, I was going to say that was an interesting take, but then I was like, where are you going with that? Like, that's it's like over 2.
Another thing that I really like about this movie is it starts to establish Ethan's character as someone who's not willing to sacrifice an innocent life for the greater good.
Yeah, where we still see like that he still kind of has a lot of these human elements where not that James Bond like didn't, but James Bond was very like hard ass. I'll do whatever it takes to, complete the mission. And he's still very similar to that. But in the later stories, we see that.
I think the difference
still kind of
between
human.
the two is that Ethan Hunt is much more of a standard black and white hero, whereas James Bond is a lot more gray in a gray area.
Yeah.
But Ethan Hunt he stands for essentially everything that everybody can stand for.
And that's one thing that I do love, and especially as the films go on, and they'll, of course, talk about it when 7 and 8 or we will. He still has his side that he's on.
Right.
Right? And they talk about it in the movie. They're like, well, which side is he on? And, he's always been on the side of, in this case, right, the United States government. Like, he's always been like, I will protect my people and do what I can to make sure that they're safe.
Right. His job has always been to save lives, and he shows that in this movie.
Yeah. Which is kind of fun.
Even though this movie isn't really about, as later movies get on, they're about like world-ending events or whatnot, but this movie's a lot more about him protecting his own identity because he's accused of being a mole.
Exactly.
And then he has to go actually find who
the mole was.
it.
And then eventually we learn who it is. He's now dealt with basically dealing with the emotional side of things of being like, this is my superior and a friend, almost a family member, to now being like, I still have to do what's right though.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Now, I love the way this movie starts with the whole sequence in Prague where they're going to the U.S. embassy and they have to, what they're told their mission is to photograph someone stealing the CIA knock list, or the list that has names of all their agents that are out in the field.
That could get exposed.
Yeah, it could be exposed and they'd be in danger. And so they're told, okay, your plan is to go and photograph someone who's going to be stealing this list and then bring it back. But it all goes south. And I just love the way that's portrayed because it almost has kind of a horror vibe to it. Like people are just getting killed.
Yeah, for like a
right.
90s horror.
And even the way they filmed that in Prague, where it's very dark, it's very foggy.
I thought the scheme of it was really good.
It was, the way the cinematography, the lighting, it all works to kind of tell this tale of betrayal and loneliness, which is where Ethan's at after all this goes down because he has no one. And he's now accused of being the one who actually killed all of them, even though we know that's not true.
But anyway.
And then, obviously, another big highlight of this movie is the Langley, the CIA break-in, right, where he's forced to actually go and steal the real knock list in order to connect the dots to find who actually is trying to frame him.
Yeah.
Evan, give me some more of your pros, rather.
I mean, there's a lot in it. I thought the score was really fun. It was the first time that we got introduced to the iconic Mission Impossible theme. And then, of course, we've seen it grow through the years, which is always fun.
That's something that's actually very interesting is the evolution. We could do a whole podcast.
Yeah, we could.
The evolution
Hearing
of the
it
Mission
from,
Impossible theme.
I mean, just because most recently I've watched 4, 5, 6, and 7 again, just more recently, just because I was planning for this, and then we were going back through and rewatching them, and hearing the score from the original one to like kind of how it's kind of evolved, taking a few different, musical turns, whatever, to now kind of change to where it's at on the more modern scale. It was kind of fun to like hear where they originated it from. Like this was like, hey, this is our baseline, and then they've kind of just grabbed parts and bits and stuff from it. The score was iconic. Hearing it for the first time was kind of fun. I think that they did a really good job with color grading. I'm very big on visuals. And like you were saying for Prague, I think that they did a really good job at showing, hey, it kind of goes from this is really peaceful, and you can kind of see when they're actually inside. Of course, there's a lot of lights. It's really bright. You can kind of tell by the skin and everything. It's a little bit more of a happy thing. And then all of a sudden, these cars explode. The dark alleys. They did a really good job at visualizing, like, somebody died in a really dark alley. The light was really dim. The girl was really sad, and she was like, where do I go? What do I do? And they just did a really good job at portraying how this kind of sadness and this death should be
visualized.
Yeah, I was going to say looked on, visualized. Yeah. And then it's kind of throughout the movie, right? The grayscale and the coloring that they just use to keep that almost depressive state. Especially like the water too. I know it sounds really dumb, but the water was very black.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's part of being nice.
Well, I'm just saying that
you just get a lot of that very authentic feel you get by shooting on location, which is really what Mission Impossible is known for, is going to all these
which is why
exotic locations.
Love movies, because especially movies that are like that, where like recently I've been watching Andor and they shot a lot of those on location. It makes it so much more relatable. I mean, in a case like this, that's not very fantasy or sci-fi like Star Wars, right? These locations are very relatable.
Right.
Some people have been there. Some people know where that is, and they're like,
but it gives the viewer, just a regular viewer, the opportunity to go to a place where they probably can't afford to go to and to travel the world without having to leave their seat.
Exactly.
Right?
So I mean, there's a lot of other pros on it, but I would say that was the biggest thing is the cinematography, the visuals, the grayscale, I think was great, especially for 96.
Mm-hmm.
Especially for 96.
No, that's the thing that I want to actually get into is because the part that I always find myself looking forward to in this movie is the final train sequence when Ethan discovers that Jim Phelps is alive, that he was the mole within the IMF, and then
that realization of him being like, oh, this guy that I've trusted who technically led my team, because at first it was Ethan was a part of the team, and then it becomes his team.
And so I just like that whole sequence when he's revealed to be the mole, he shoots Claire, Jim's wife, and so she's dead, and then he gets up on the roof of the train to go and escape, and then Ethan has to follow him, and you just have this kind of this action-packed ending sequence, which with the helicopter in the tunnel.
So cool.
And it is, that's the thing is like it's 1996, right? This movie's almost 30 years old, but visually it's not as bad as a 30-year-old movie. But even
that's
though,
one thing that
considering there's a lot of computer generated effects in it, it looks great.
I mean,
comparatively.
You could say the same thing about 2, 3, and even 4. 4 was a little bit newer, but these movies hold very well.
They do.
Even if this was released now, like just exactly how it is, it would hold up.
It would
well.
Because I've seen there's Marvel movies that have released the past 10 years
God.
with the CGI is worse than that.
I hate how Captain America is always on my brain.
I know. I hate that we have that. That's our standard for CGI is
masterpiece.
It's crazy. It's crazy what we went to from like 2007 with Transformers or Pirates of the Caribbean to what Marvel became.
That is a perfect example. Pirates of the Caribbean came out in 2001. Right. 2001. And that was...
I'm more talking like
stupid CGI.
I'm more talking like the second one. Dead Man's Chest. Oh, right?
So close.
With Davy Jones. The CGI is incredible in that.
On
it holds
him,
up well.
He was all CGI.
And
yes, but no.
So knowing that that's the standard, right? That Transformers, that's the standard for CGI. This movie still holds up pretty well.
This movie also, I've loved the Mission Impossible movies time in and time out because they don't rely on CGI.
Right, which is really what it's become. I mean, there's CGI in every movie. There's visual effects in every movie, right? But it's...
Their action sequence, and Tom Cruise has always been like, I'll can do this myself. And you, of course, have heard where he's been like, yeah, safety coordinator, you're out then.
Right.
Because they're like, nah, you can't do that. And he's like, I'll get a new one. Because he wants to make this feel very real. Sure, it's not as intense as a CGI situation could be. Because I
think it's way more intense.
Well, but you can make more up with CGI.
Which is why it feels more fake.
Exactly. But I'm just saying that, like, that's why I enjoy it more because it feels more relatable. Like, because it's real.
Grounded stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's through all of the films.
But with all of that, I do think that when you get to that final climactic set piece on the train, even though it's not a real train, right? Like they did in Dead Reckoning where they shot on a real train, you still get, it's still very intense and very well done. All things considered, like it's obviously it's a little bit far-fetched, but it's still
to an extent, but
it's still fun and it's still a good action finale.
Yeah.
For the movie. I just love the part when he pulls out the gum and then the Mission Impossible theme kicks on and then the helicopter blows up. It's just I think it's a great movie. It's been fun going back and rewatching this and just
seeing kind of the staple.
Right.
This was the staple. This is where they created the next 8 movies.
And the fun thing is too, like this is what I remember being my first favorite movie. So like, but as long as when I was just some young buckling kid, before I saw The Dark Knight, when that became my favorite movie, this was my gold standard movie. I loved this movie. And I was like 9 years old. I think
coincidentally, one of the first movies that I genuinely watched either at home or all the way through was Iron Man. I think.
Crazy. Look how young you are. Anyways, do you have what are some cons for this movie? So any shortcomings that you think this movie had?
I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying that I didn't like the movie. Clearly, I love it, but it's just a little older. They also had to spend a lot more time with a lot of the character development. So there wasn't a ton that I thought could have gone a little bit further maybe. But honestly, I don't really have many cons. I'm giving it a little bit of the benefit of the doubt because it is an older film, right? Compared to where screenwriting has come, plot points, cinematography, CGI action, and everything has come. This film stands very, very well for where it comes from. It's late 90s, so it's early 2000s where, kind of more CGI was a lot more introduced. But honestly, I didn't really have too much. I don't know. I can't really think of much.
No,
honestly.
and I'm on the same boat. I think it was a very well done movie. I think it's a very good Samuel movie. I definitely recommend watching before you go see The Final Reckoning because it is in this movie where we're introduced to two characters that I know will show up in Final Reckoning, which is Kittredge.
Yep.
And then William Donlow, the guy who Ethan essentially pranks in his heist of the CIA vault.
Yeah.
So definitely give it a rewatch before you go see The Final Reckoning because we will see characters from this movie that are going to reappear.
Which is kind of fun.
Final Reckoning.
Yeah.
So with that said, let's give this movie a rating. So before that, obviously, you have to remind people of our movie scale at 1, 5, and 10 stars. I have Independence Day Resurgence, The Creator, and Mission Impossible Fallout.
So sad that The Creator is up there.
And, well, we're going to have to update this scale soon, but not today.
We'll do it.
Tell them quickly about your scale.
Ooh, let's see if I remember. Dial of Destiny, Fast X, and Interstellar.
As a 1, 5, and 10. There you have it.
What?
So what did we rate the first Mission Impossible? Well,
I think I gave it a grade 7.
Yeah, I gave this movie an 8. Yeah. I think it's a great movie. Definitely.
I just know that these movies hold a lot more of an emotional value to you than they do to me. It's the same with like Star Wars, right? Star Wars holds a more emotional value to me. There's franchise bias, right? Yeah, and I get that, but I'm not saying that it's not. I still think it's up there. I think it's just not as good to me because I'm not as emotionally invested in the story as you are.
You know what I just realized? Just looking at the poster, I remember the guy who wrote this movie actually wrote Jurassic Park. So there's a fun fact for you.
Wow. Who would have thought? Which is another great film. And that's a movie that should never have been continued to be made. They should have left it, moved on.
And we're coming on the 7th one this summer. But before we get to the 7th Jurassic Park / Jurassic World.
I mean, I'm excited to just see
the
dinosaurs.
4th Jurassic World, the 7th Jurassic Park, or maybe it's not actually, who knows. We watched Mission Impossible 2 is what we're getting at. MI2. Mission Impossible 2, wow. So released 4 years later in 2000, the year 2000, same year as Gladiator, actually. And
beautiful film.
I believe this was one of the highest grossing movies of the year. I could be wrong about that. Don't quote me.
I bet you Gladiator barely beat
it. But no,
it
it actually did beat Gladiator. I did check that.
Maybe because it was a sequel, so it had more traction.
Well, a sequel, and it was a PG-13 movie, so there's a wider audience that you can reach.
That's fair.
But Mission Impossible 2, wow. If there is any two movies that are so different from each other that you wouldn't even recognize,
this is a great example.
Franchise. Yeah, these movies are. They could not be more black and white compared to what their identity.
Which I think is kind of what makes it fun to watch. I think this is more of a fun watch than like I'm actually interested in enjoying it.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. I think it's
so random.
It's very much a guilty pleasure movie. Ugh. And part of that, actually not even part of that, all of that is because a key core of Mission Impossible through the first 5 movies was they had a different director for each movie. Mm-hmm. That's not the case with, the last
6,
4,
7, and 8, which I'm happy with.
Yeah, me too. But the first 5 Mission Impossibles had a different director, right? And so they had a different style. They had a different.
They were all kind of, which we'll talk about, of course, next week. But 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 all kind of had their own little unique.
Yeah, they were very
twists.
They had their very own distinct personality and different visual styles, and that is definitely true for this movie. This movie is directed by John Woo, who did a lot of foreign films. That were very stylized, very over the top and heavy in their action. And that's exactly the identity you got with Mission Impossible 2 is that it was a very stylized, kind of over the top and outrageous kind of movie.
Yeah, it was their kind of first take of being like, hey, let's try some really advanced plot points and really try and push it out. It was
really different. It's a very different movie. But the movie itself, it follows obviously Ethan Hunt again, who returns as IMF agent.
And it starts with him rock climbing, actually shot in Utah, if I'm right, in Arches National Park.
Yeah, somewhere down there.
Somewhere cool.
And so it follows Ethan Hunt, who's given the mission to go and find and stop a former IMF agent named Sean Ambrose, who has gone rogue and is planning to release a virus called Chimera and then sell the cure to the highest bidder. And so it follows his story.
Traveling around, trying to stop him.
And this one's set in Australia. Yeah, has to go find a virus that threatens the death of the world. And yeah, like I said, very visually different, very Just everything is different. The story is obviously very different. This one's a lot more advanced in the sense that they went from there's a mole in the IMF.
They did too big of a leap.
It is a very big leap because it's like it goes from there's a mole in the IMF to now there's this
global destruction.
Virus, right? So it took a big jump, which for the better or worse, it is what it is.
Yeah, I don't think that we'll get into it clearly, but I think that it was too drastic of like being relatable. That's why I've always loved these movies, is it feels pretty relatable, and then some of them gets a little crazy.
And even just like down to Ethan's look, right? He's got the long hair instead of the short buzz cut he has.
But that was also the early
mission.
2000s, right?
Yeah, it's very much a reflection of early 2000s movies, and that it's very over the top. It's got like, it's got a lot of that mid to late 90s action identity where it's just the physics don't make any sense.
Slow motion.
Yeah, lots of slow motion, lots of explosions.
Way too much slow motion.
Way too much. I agree with that. But with that said, there are some good parts of this movie. There are some pros. So hit me with your top pros.
Kind of the same as the first one, right? Shooting on location. We got to see new areas, right? That's always the fun part of these movies, right? We get to kind of travel with them. The word that you use, the globetrotter aspect of it.
The funny thing about this movie is that it didn't really have that much because
it was more like one or two good places that they capitalized on.
It's more, I think most of the movie's set in Australia. They do go to Spain in the beginning of the movie.
Oh, yeah. To go and
recruit.
What's her name?
Naya, which is a thief that Ethan recruits to help with his mission.
Kind of weird. Which I didn't think was it was an interesting one for them to be like, here's this girl that we're just going to throw in there. Oh, she's a thief.
Right.
Just
Naya Nordhoff Hall, played by Thandie Newton.
Yeah.
Another funny thing is Anthony Hopkins actually shows up in this movie for like 3 minutes.
He's just there.
I don't even think he's actually credited in the movie, but he is in the movie as the IMF secretary who gives Ethan his mission.
Anthony Hopkins.
But yeah, the
silence of the lambs.
The globetrotting aspect isn't there as much as we start to see in later movies because
I still enjoy it because it's new.
It sets you in a new terrain, which in this case is Australia, and it's got that different vibe, that different feel. With that said, I think that the plot of the movie actually works pretty well. Considering it was a big jump, it was a big leap. I do think that the idea of the virus, it was well done, but the problem with this movie, I think,
a little bit more of the execution of it.
Yeah, it's more the directing style, which that's not to say anything against John Woo, but I'm not into that kind of movie. He has a lot of movies. He has a big following. People like him. That's not me. And
I felt like they should have done a little bit more of keeping it more grounded because this story is supposed to be a little bit more of like, it's not a super situation. Yes, it's still dire and, they have to send in the IMF because nobody else can really do it. But then they made it a little too unobtainable by like, oh, it's a deathly virus that could kill trillions, blah, blah.
Yeah, it's
just a little like...
It's a wild story.
Yeah. I'm not saying that it was bad.
What I'm saying is I don't think that the problem with this movie is the plot or the script, except for the dialogue. The dialogue's pretty bad in this movie.
There's a few scenes that like, they'll be like, no, why would you do that? You're like,
the dialogue is definitely not its strong point, but just the concept of, they have to, break in, steal this virus. It's not a bad plot.
Yeah.
And I think it works. I'm mixed on it. There's a little bit of a bright spot with the score, right? You have Hans Zimmer who did the score for this movie, but if I feel like if you had given Hans Zimmer the chance to score a Mission Impossible movie done by a different director, you would have got a vastly different score that would have been way better than what we got.
That's true. I feel like, especially over the years, Hans Zimmer has done a lot more, especially with like Nolan, because I just love the two. They're two peas in the pod, where he does a lot more of like, here's the score, now write the movie. And I think in this case, it was more Woo was like, hey, we need a score. And then he kind of just had to adapt to it, which is fine. And I still think he did a good job. But in this case, for Hans, they didn't really let him do a lot of his like creativity. They didn't let him be him.
I mean, it still has his fingerprints on it.
Yes.
But you can tell that it was, it was
a little bit more like, hey, this is your guideline.
It's scored to match the visual and the feel of the movie, which that's what music is intended to do. But I don't think that it fit very well with what could have been because it's very over the top, very excessive.
Fair. That's fair.
And a lot of pigeons. There's a lot of pigeons in this movie. It's a staple of John Woo, but there is pigeons. Go back and rewatch it. There's a good amount of pigeons.
I just did last night, but yes.
Go rewatch it again.
I know that there's...
Look for the pigeons.
Well, I know that there's the specific scene that I'm thinking of where he's kind of like watching over the crowd and then it's the pigeons that fly over.
Yeah.
It's just like for fun.
It's a weird... I don't know. It's some kind of weird
It's like Quentin Tarantino and feet.
But it definitely... very over the top, very different.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I have that many pros of this movie just because I think it's
I still think it's great 100%.
I think it's entertaining, but I
took such a drastic turn from 1 to 2 that it was kind of just you kind of just shoot yourself in the foot a little bit and you're like, oh.
It almost feels like a bad dream compared to the rest of Mission Impossibles is what I'm saying, because it's so different. The rest of them at least feel connected. This one feels so out of place.
A bad dream's good. Which is true because they all fall on a story because it's still Ethan, doing IMF stuff, but it didn't feel as obtainable.
Right. And then the only returning character they did have was Luther coming back, or Ving Rhames coming back as Luther.
Which I also love how Luther has been at the story since day one. Because through all the movies, we see these people come and go, which, right? That's just kind of how castings or movies work. But I love, and eventually we'll talk about it in just a second, Simon Pegg. And these guys who now trust Ethan so much that they've just stayed through it. And I love how his character and Ethan Hunt have just always worked together through every movie.
Definitely. So if there's nothing else you'd like to say about this movie, there's really not that much.
As far as good or anything, I mean, we just kind of bantered about it. A little too much slow motion.
A lot of slow motion.
Which was a huge killer. Because there were some scenes that were fine that I was like, okay, kind of cool. But a great example is I don't know. I feel like they took a page out of The Matrix and we're like, let's do a lot of this cool
I can see that.
Slow motion CGI.
But when was The Matrix? Was The Matrix before or after?
I think The Matrix was... I think it was...
Wasn't The Matrix 2001? Matrix might have been after this movie. But I don't even know if it's really borrowing so much from The Matrix as it is just borrowing from
I don't know. I might get canceled for that.
Kind of the Chinese movies, right? A lot of movies produced in China.
That's to say. Why didn't you say the Asians?
Because Chinese movies are different than Japanese movies. I just want you to know that.
Yeah, but you could just say Asian movies.
But they're very different.
Canceled.
John Woo, right? That's what he directed. Was a lot of.
Is he Chinese or Japanese?
He's Chinese.
You sure?
Yeah. I'm gonna get canceled if I got that wrong, which I won't because I'm right. But the point remains. The point remains that that's kind of where the visual style is coming from.
Yeah, where he took more of his director, his kind of signature, and implanted it
over the top Chinese action films.
Can be fine because there's a lot of directors that put their staple,
which we're going to see with Mission Impossible 3. So before we talk about that, any final thoughts on Mission Impossible 2?
No. I think it was. I think a guilty pleasure is a good way of looking at it because
it's a guilty pleasure movie.
It's not bad because it's still Mission Impossible. We still see Ethan Hunt. Right. I love Luther, but that's
a TV show, isn't it?
What? No, I'm just kidding. I love Luther.
You're too young for that. Don't worry about it.
What the hell?
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Anyways, let's give this movie a rating. I gave this movie a 5.5.
I gave it a 5.8.
You gave it a 5.8. I was too lazy to show that. I just a 5.5 too. So
same shit, different.
There we are.
Yeah.
And
I feel like is a good.
I think it's a fair rating because this movie's not good.
Maybe a little bit closer to a 6 if I was being generous. It's not below a 5. It's definitely not below a 5.
So that said, definitely, I think if you're going to if there's any movies you don't need to rewatch to prepare for Mission Impossible: Final Reckoning, I would guess it would be this one. But I don't quote me on that. I could be totally wrong. But this one has always been the least.
Well, because one's a staple, because one's brought up in that one. 3 is really good, just in general, and then 4, 5, and 6 and 7 have characters.
They're all very interconnected.
That's fair.
But I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe not. It just is. It's always been the least connected. Of the series.
What do we?
But let's talk about
number 3.
Dude, Mission Impossible 3, released in 2006. So 6 years later. After Mission Impossible 2.
So good.
And again, Mission Impossible early time staple. They hired a new director this time in J.J. Abrams. And this was actually J.J. Abrams'
I think it was
directorial debut for a feature film.
I was going to say, I think he did some small work on early films, but this was his first This is his first director credit, but he did have some work with different TV shows that kind of attracted Tom Cruise to his directing style. And it shows. J.J. Abrams did a great. I genuinely love this one.
Here's the thing about J.J. Abrams. Okay. Here's the thing about J.J. Abrams.
Was this 2005?
This was 2006.
6. Okay. Thank you.
So, when the Star Wars sequel trilogy came out, Star Wars 7, Star Wars 9, directed both by J.J. Abrams, there was...
You mean 7 and 9?
7 and 9, yeah.
9 was Rian Johnson.
No, 8 was Rian Johnson. 9 was J.J.
That's
Abrams.
what I... Is that not what I just said?
No, it's not. But that's my point. Okay, so 7 and 9 come out. There's a lot of disdain for J.J. Abrams because look at what he did. He had a perfect opportunity to make something incredible. He didn't do it. And to a great degree, there's a lot of people that can argue the same thing with Star Trek because he came in Star Trek and he pissed off a lot of fans in what he did. Now, I don't think that those two Star Treks are that bad, but
I love Star Trek and Into Darkness is probably up there for some.
But there was a lot of fans that were pissed off about that.
God. No, which I get.
My point being, well, let's like specifically with Star Wars 9, I hated J.J. Abrams for that.
Okay, but there was a reason. J.J. Abrams did decent with 7, and I'll give him that. But then they decided to switch up directors. So then J.J. Abrams had to go in and fix
There's a lot
loopholes.
of problems with that whole trilogy, but my point is there's a lot of hatred I had in my heart, my soul for J.J. Abrams after Star Wars Episode 9 came out.
Well, yes.
But when I rewatched Mission Impossible 3, it made me appreciate...
You're like, wait a second, I love this guy again.
It made me love the fact that once in his lifetime, he didn't screw up a franchise and he actually took it in the right direction. And that was the case with Mission Impossible 3. So Mission Impossible 3... Obviously, again, we follow the story of Ethan Hunt. And Ethan Hunt's mission in this movie is to track down an arms dealer, played by Philip Seymour Hoffman,
who I love,
who is selling the mysterious rabbit's foot, which to this day, we don't know what the rabbit's foot is.
Which I think is awesome. And that's one of my favorite things about this movie, which we will get into in just a second.
But this movie starts out with what I think is the best cold open of any movie. That I would put up for debate.
Right into this really intense scene.
But obviously spoiler alert, because we, this is
what we do.
Alert.
Who would have thought?
But spoilers. So the very first thing we see, right? We see the Paramount logo and we hear Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, Owen Davian, talking. And then we see Ethan tied to a chair. He's all bloody. He's bruised. He's sweating. Mm-hmm. And Owen Davian is threatening Ethan's wife because Ethan is now married to Julia, played by Michelle Monaghan. And he's threatening his wife to kill her if he doesn't provide him location of the mysterious rabbit's foot. Mm-hmm. This scene is absolute cinema gold. I would recommend, even just when you have a chance, if you haven't seen this movie, go watch just the pre-credits scene. It's only a few minutes long.
I think it's 2.5.
And
because it's pretty intense.
The acting range of Philip Seymour Hoffman and Tom Cruise in that scene is so
It's a staple for the movie, and I think it was a great introductory to saying, hey, this is how your movie's going to be, guys.
Exactly. I think that's the biggest thing, too, is that if you look from where Mission Impossible 2 was to how this movie opens up.
They did a smart play, marketing-wise, of saying, hey, let's put something crazy intense at the beginning, because nobody walked into it expecting that, and then you see that and you're like, whoa. And then the credits go into it and you're like,
it is one of my favorite, if not my favorite, cold openings of any movie. Mm-hmm. Because
I'd say it's up there for me too.
It puts you right into what you're going to get through the movie, which is a grounded and a very gritty type of movie. This movie has a very distinct visual style, which have you seen Super 8?
Yes, of course.
Super 8, another J.J. Abrams movie. Very similar visual style to Super 8, where it's a lot of lens flares, kind of a trademark of J.J. Abrams, mm-hmm. but a lot of lens flares, a lot of kind of graininess, very gritty, very down to earth.
Yep.
And that's kind of the visual style you got, which is a very stark contrast to the over the top, excessive slow motion mm-hmm. kind of style, which Mission Impossible 2 was. Mm-hmm. But I think this movie is great. I think it's the most underappreciated movie of all the Mission Impossibles. Mm-hmm. Because
it came out at a really bad time.
Yeah.
What I mean by that is after 2. I mean, he literally came in to be like, let's fix this almost. Not that saying 2 wasn't bad, but it didn't leave a good taste in everybody's mouth.
No, it's definitely the most divisive.
And then they come out with 3, so then people were like, 2 wasn't that good. I don't want to go see a third one. But then third actually did really well. Mm-hmm.
And it really, I think, and as we were talking about earlier, it was really the movie that introduced the idea of the globe-trotting IMF team, right? Because we see them start their mission first in Germany, and then they go to...
Well, first it's Ethan at home, which is somewhere in the U.S., and then then he has to go on the mission, and then
it goes to Germany. Then
basically comes back
Vatican City
after whatever her name dies. Yep, and then
they go to Shanghai, Langley.
And then it ends in
Shanghai.
Yeah, it's just a different part of it.
So which
is cool.
They really started to kind of dive into the idea of globetrotting, which I think was something that James Bond was doing very well before, was kind of the idea of going all over the globe and taking your audience in different places where they could be.
Which is kind of what James Bond's character had to do.
Right.
Originally.
And so that we see that in all of the later Mission Impossibles, that becomes a key staple of going through all the going to different countries and different places. And that was kind of really introduced here. Mm-hmm. Even though they did it in the first movie, it wasn't to as much of an extent as
it was kind of, I mean, I thought it was still good, but they didn't have to go to a lot of different scenes. They capitalized on the locations that they were at, especially the final arc when they're in Shanghai and Ethan's finally like, I need to go and try and save my wife, leading up until kind of where the beginning of the movie started off.
There's so many good things about this movie, man. Give me one to start off. Give me one to kick it all off.
I really like of course, after the, beginning intro, we see this kind of peaceful life and we see this fun, weird side of Ethan that we haven't seen yet, right? Mm-hmm. He's at home. He works for the Department of Transportation.
Well, that's his cover, right?
Same shit. But then it's just like they're doing like a housewarming party. He's really just casual. Everybody's like, wow, he's just super cool. But it's funny as an audience where normally we've seen this crazy action. And I think that was a great staple to show this movie because the movie's really about him trying to get back and help save his wife. That's the entire movie's base. And I thought it was a really fun intro of showing their kind of love and how they work together. Mm-hmm. And it really made you appreciate them more. And I think that was a really great intro.
Right. It built that emotional connection of Ethan to Julia.
Which I love.
Which I think means a lot more because of the way the movie opens, where you already see Julia tied up, being threatened. And then you jump back in time to where you actually now start to establish what their relationship is. You see them get married right before Ethan goes on another mission,
which is kind of fun. And
I think the emotion that really works in this movie is just how they really made you care for the characters, and they really made you again, adding to Ethan's character development, is they showed how Ethan cares about the one life. Right, that's his key character trait, is that he doesn't want to let any innocent life die for the greater good.
But I think it's also kind of fun because then we see this other side of him where he has this one special person, his wife, that he's willing to technically betray and turn other people away to make sure that she's safe. Because, of course, through the scene, right, he has to go through and basically do illegal stuff, go and steal the rabbit's foot, which kind of didn't really have permission to, broke into a different facility. But he didn't,
again, the way he works is he's not going to hurt anybody in that process.
Yeah, so then, exactly. But, like, right, it was just kind of this good love arc of him being like, I'll do what I need to take care of her. And then, right, it follows that story through the entire movie. Mm-hmm. There's a lot to it. I mean, honestly, this movie's so great just overall.
I really like it. It introduces Benji for the first time.
Yes.
Simon Pegg, who in this movie,
I love him.
He's overweight. He's working at
which is kind of
office
funny.
Position.
Yeah, he's kind of this weird like IT guy that he's kind of got these fun, stupid jokes. He's got his little accent. Everybody's kind of making fun of him, and Ethan befriends him, and now Simon.
And he ultimately ends up having the role by the end of the movie of that guy in the chair where he's helping Ethan to find Julia.
Yeah, because he's literally
becomes a key staple of Benji's character. Is he always doing that for Ethan? He's always him and guiding him.
Exactly. So especially through the newer movies, right? Mm-hmm. He's kind of the weird IT guy. Not that Luther isn't, but they're both kind of working together on that. Anyway.
Yeah. Another underappreciated part of this movie is the score by Michael Giacchino. I think it's how you say his name.
Giacchino?
We'll see. I don't know. Who cares? The point is the score is good, and it's underrated because it's
Imagine they swapped this and Hans. Hans did this one.
That'd be intense. But I think the score was good for what it was.
I agree.
And especially the intensity of... So right towards the end of the movie when he finds Julia and he's having to go through this little building that's really gritty, really gross. and he's having to try and track her down. And the score at that part when he finally meets up with Owen Davian is really intense because right, Ethan gets a little implant injected into his brain and he's gonna die.
One thing that I love about that Shanghai scene, actually, because I saw this, it was a while back, but somebody was talking about like what was one of the longest scenes ever shot, and it was actually the scene of him running on the canal, and they had to do it, I think he said like 2 or 3 times, but he was like, we were moving our boat so fast because he was just full sprinting, like he was just going.
That is a very good shot. I love it
because of how well, exactly, and it was. I think that he said that, I don't remember how long it was or something, but like he did basically an eagle or a bird's eye of saying like, this is how far and how long that scene was, because it was shot on location and it was down like the whole canal and it was awesome.
There's just something about Tom Cruise running as Ethan Hunt that just hits like crack. It's so epic.
Which we get in the new one, and we've seen a few scenes.
And we see, and essentially now you get an Ethan Hunt.
He's always running in a different place too.
Yeah.
Rooftops. Well, I mean, I guess rooftops are kind of
the Fallout.
Yeah,
run,
we don't.
It's so good. But the Dead Reckoning run, I think, takes the cake through Venice. Oh my god!
This one we'll see him doing a lot of running. I think it was London.
And this one,
the new one, Final Reckoning, because we see a little bit of it, but then we also have a lot of London teasers. We do see so I'm assuming it's.
So I mean, it'll be interesting to see how that turns out. I'm excited for it. But
that being said, this was overall a great film. I love it.
Yeah, and it's definitely a lot more intense than Mission Impossible 2, so if that's what you're looking for.
Which is why I enjoyed it so much.
Now, something that I think is very interesting, okay, it's something that if you're planning on seeing The Final Reckoning, the little birdie told me that you should rewatch Mission Impossible 3 to prepare for that. Why? Because if you go and you watch the Final Reckoning trailer, there is one shot in the trailer where Ethan grabs the rabbit's foot for Mission Impossible 3, but it's not a shot for Mission Impossible 3. It's a de-aged Ethan. It's a new shot, which tells me that somehow they are probably going to incorporate the rabbit's foot into this movie.
Well, what it sounds like and what we've seen is there's really small little staples of kind of some of these early films, and just... I mean, in the trailer, we see a lot of like, the stunts and everything.
But all of those are reused shots. There are shots from the different movies, but the rabbit's foot shot is a new shot. And if you look at Ethan, you can tell it's not Tom Cruise from 2006.
Interesting. It's new Tom Cruise that they just
digitally de-aged. And another thing too, you go back and you rewatch the scene when Ethan is talking to Benji, tells him about the rabbit's foot. Benji gives an explanation of what he thinks the rabbit's foot is. And he says he thinks it's world-ending technology. Well, what are we introduced to in Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning? Technology.
Same thing.
The AI, the entity. And so there are theories that somehow the rabbit's foot is actually going to end up being some way connected to the entity.
Like an early version of the virus
maybe
or something.
An early version of the entity.
That would actually be really cool, because at first we knew that it was a virus. We didn't know that it was like a virus technology.
Well, they never said it. They just said it. It has, all that we know is that on the canister.
Don't they preface it that it was some type of dangerous disease or dangerous virus? I swear that they mentioned
all they do is, so on the canister, it was a biohazard symbol. And the only thing we know about it is that Owen Davian was going to sell it to somewhere in the Middle East. That's all that's said about it. But when Benji describes it, he hypothesizes that it's some kind of world-ending technology based on what he learned from his professor at Harvard or whatever it was. Okay. So there's nothing definite, nothing set in stone. The only the big reason why I think that they're going to reintroduce it is because
they did basically a reshot.
Yes, is because of that shot that's in the Final Reckoning trailer, but that was a new shot, which means they spent money on it to get it. So that'll be very interesting. Very interesting. Without building too much hype for the Final Reckoning, this movie, Mission Impossible 3, in and itself, is a great movie.
I loved it.
Absolutely recommend watching it.
A great intro and a great finish, and it tells a great story. Overall, I loved it.
And I think it takes the really first steps to kind of implementing that Mission Impossible kind of DNA of what makes Mission Impossible, right? The team functionality, the globe trotting, another key staple is missions constantly going wrong, right? Mm-hmm. That's what Mission Impossible is it's an impossible mission.
But they trying.
Fail on their missions, then they keep trying.
Until they finally get it right.
Yeah, at the very last second they get it right, which in this case is a big old truck to the head of Owen Davian. Any final thoughts on Mission Impossible 3?
I loved it. Overall.
It's a good
And we'll
movie.
of course see by my score. I think that you're a bit higher on it.
I am a bit higher. So with that said,
Understandably
let's rate this movie.
I did a
gave this
grade
movie-
8. You did an 8.5.
I did give me an 8.5.
Well, you go by half points.
And you gave this movie an 8.
Yeah. I feel like that's a staple. Like, that's great. For me personally, putting stuff into the 9s and the 10s is a bit harder because a 9s and 10s for me means that like they have a lot more of an emotional connection for me. So I see a lot of the movies that I really enjoy or like fall in between that 6.5, 8 category, which is this. However, when we're talking about Fallout definitely falls into more of that like 9, 10 category.
Boy, we're gonna get there. I'll tell you what, we're gonna get there.
Yeah, I know.
But
Anyway,
all that said, if you haven't seen Mission Impossible 3 or 1 or 2 for that matter, definitely go and watch it. Go prepare for the Final Reckoning, because I don't know how the Final Reckoning is going to turn out. I have high expectations for it.
Well, this is the final one, which means that we get some type of an ending. In some case, good or bad, mysterious, cliffhanger.
I'm excited for it, but one thing I will say
but-
is I do believe, whether or not I love it, I think it'll be a movie that is absolutely worth seeing in a movie theater.
Well,
And
yeah,
so-
you have to.
you have
I think
to,
every
right?
movie should be seen in the movie theater.
Well, yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
But Tom Cruise, I mean, he's all about keeping movie theaters alive, which you could tell on his later
Well, we
movies.
see a
He
bunch
is
of
all
these
about-
interviews that the one that we were talking about today, he was literally talking about, he's like, I grew up watching movies and loved cinema, that he was like, I just want to bring this to the big screen.
Right.
And now he's been able
He's
to.
all about the big screen. So I promise you that whether or not this movie tells a great story, it's going to be worth at least seeing on the big screen. So let us know what you think about the first 3 Mission Impossibles. How would you rate them?
Get prepared.
What is the best part about them? And of those 3, which is your favorite? And then get ready for next week, because we are going to go back and rewatch Ghost Protocol, Rogue Nation, and Fallout.
Yes. Those are some of my moments.
And then after that, oh boy,
The big day's coming.
the big day. But with that said, thank you for watching Spoiler Alert. Let us know what you think, and we'll see you next time.